Kwasi Kwarteng, it's been painted as a show of strength, the fact
Sure.
that Theresa May is in a position to reshuffle her cabinet and perhaps lower-ranking ministers too. But it's not a show of strength, is it? She's been forced into it because of high-profile resignations before Christmas.
Well, there are two things. I think both of those statements are right. I think, yes, it wouldn't have happened necessarily if Damien Green had stayed. But actually, it is a sign of strength, because what people were saying at the election, after the election, was that nothing happened. It was a very minimal, very low-key reshuffle, and people were saying that the Prime Minister wasn't strong enough. Today, the beginning of 2018, we're going to have a wide reshuffle. As you said, there are lots of new faces.
And so I think that is going to be a wide reshuffle.
And I think that is a sign of strength. Yes, we've already heard that I think the party chairman is leaving. We've heard one or two other cabinet ministers are resigning, not because they were sacked, but because of health reasons and other personal reasons. So there will be, as you said, as you yourself said, there will be lots of new faces around the table. And I think that's a good thing. That's something which parties do, governments do from time to time, and it can refresh and sharpen the message.
Yeah, it may be, but she may be seizing the opportunity as a result of Damien Green having to leave before Christmas, or deciding to. You mentioned cabinet ministers leaving for health reasons. We know about James Brokenshire, now the former Northern Ireland Secretary. Are there others then who are resigning for health reasons?
Well, that was the person I had in mind. I didn't know what the exact reasons were, but I was told that this announcement would be made, and you clearly have been let in on the secret, as it were, and we all know about that now.
Right, we'll talk about that in just a moment. You mentioned the party chairman, Patrick McLaughlin. It hasn't been a secret, really, a very well-held secret, that he has wanted to leave that position.
Sure.
Who would be a good party chairman in your mind?
Well, I think there are many people. I mean, there are many people who are good communicators. I think that some of the names that have been in the frame, people like Brandon Lewis, is very effective. I think he'd be a good chairman, but there are lots of other people. I mean, it's not my.
And what about Chris
position.
Grayling, who is the current Transport Secretary?
I think Chris is highly effective. I mean, he, after all, was the head of Theresa May's campaign for the leadership, which was effective, was successful. He's a good, strong communicator. He's been at cabinet level for a while now, and I think he'd be a good party chairman.
I mean, there seems to be a certain amount of confusion because the Conservative Party accidentally tweeted congratulations to Chris Grayling on his appointment as chairman and then deleted it. What do you think that
I don't know.
says?
I haven't seen the first tweet. I didn't see the deletion. I don't know what's going on. It's not really. I'm not the person to ask about high-level appointments like that.
Right, but if we're talking again about a position of strength for the Prime Minister, she has U-turned on another manifesto pledge. She did that yesterday in the broadcast with Andrew Marr, this time on fox hunting. Why, when it's something she believes in?
Well, I think fox hunting was clearly an issue which came up a bit in the election. It was something which people felt wasn't really strictly a priority. It shouldn't be a priority, and the Prime Minister has adapted the message to that. I mean, the fact is, Joe, we have a hung Parliament, so many of the things in the manifesto will have to be a subject to compromise, and I think that was probably one of them.
Right. I mean, you could say that she did win the election, even with a reduced majority. So why is she abandoning manifesto pledges one by one, whether it's grammar schools, whether it was changing the social care system, and now it's fox hunting? What else is she going to U-turn on?
The reality, as you know, is that we've got a hung Parliament. We've also got the most sort of extensive legislative programme, given the Brexit, given EU withdrawal, that a government has faced in many decades, and there are provisions of time. There is simply not enough time to try and get everything you put in the manifesto, and things have to give, and I think the Prime Minister is showing flexibility on that.
All right. Before we go on, there's plenty of speculation, as you've been hearing, so all is not yet clear. But let's look at what we know so far. The reshuffle was triggered, as we were discussing, by the resignation of Damien Green, First Secretary of State, before Christmas. If Theresa May keeps the position, which was seen as her de facto deputy, speculation is it could go to Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt or Justice Secretary David Lidington. This morning, Northern Ireland Secretary James Brokenshire resigned from the Cabinet, citing health reasons. Patrick McLaughlin also relinquished his role as Conservative Party chairman, and amongst the names as his successor is Transport Secretary Chris Grayling. Those who are believed to be facing demotion or a sideways move include Education Secretary Justine Greening and Leader of the House Andrea Leadsom. But the top jobs are expected to remain broadly the same, with Philip Hammond staying on as Chancellor, Boris Johnson as Foreign Secretary, Amber Rudd at the Home Office and David Davis as Brexit Secretary. Michael Gove is also likely to stay on as Environment Secretary. The changes could provide an opportunity for others, with former nurse Anne Milton tipped to take over as Health Secretary should Jeremy Hunt move. And Brandon Lewis, Dominic Raab and James Cleverly also expected to receive a promotion. And Brexit Minister Steve Baker may see his position elevated if he is invited to attend cabinet meetings as the Minister for No Deal. Well, I think we can find out a little bit more on what Fleet Street makes of this reshuffle with Tom Newton-Dunn from The Sun and Lucy Fisher from The Times. Welcome to both of you. Lucy Fisher, we've had the resignation of James Brokenshire. There is now fevered speculation about the role of party chairman. Is this reshuffle going to turn out to be more wide-ranging than perhaps anticipated?
Well, it's unclear, Joe, and I don't want to make myself a hostage to fortune, but I think something that obviously needs to be said is that with Boris Johnson, Philip Hammond staying in place, this reshuffle is really going to be more about what the Prime Minister isn't able to do as much as what she is able to do. The party chairman role, I think, is something everyone is looking very closely at. I think that might be a major story today, the huge shake-up of CCHQ that needs to come following the election disaster, quite a lot of mistakes and mishaps in the party conference last year, the appointment of regional chairman, how they try and get the membership up. I think that's going to be a really big issue.
Right, and we're going to talk a little bit more about rejuvenating the party and how the government intends to do that. But Tom Newton-Dunn, there has been talk about Jeremy Hunt, the Health Secretary, replacing Damien Green as Theresa May's de facto deputy. How likely is that now?
I'm told that that probably is quite unlikely, actually, simply because there won't be a like-for-like replacement. There probably won't be a First Secretary of State, which was the job that Damien Green had, the de facto Prime Minister. The problem with reshuffle days is you can get a line off number 10 and people close to the Prime Minister early on because they have their battle plan. The battle plan then comes into contact with the enemy, as all decent battles do, and then it begins to fall apart when ministers don't go in the same direction you quite want them to do and get a little bit upset about the jobs they're offered. So it all sort of implodes. But my feeling at the beginning of the day certainly was, I think Brandon Lewis, who we've just seen going into number 10 now, is going to be the new party chairman, and a very dynamic, younger character is he, and probably very good for the job. Jeremy Hunt, I would put a bit of money, not all my money quite yet, but a fair bit of money on going to business. Greg Clark will be moved aside, maybe taking another job. Jeremy Hunt's been talking a little bit off his brief in the last sort of few months about the need to revitalise the economy and get the nation ship-shape for Brexit in terms of reskilling, rebalancing the sort of trades industries that used to exist that may be not quite as productive away from the European Union.
Right.
The whole big tech build-up, I mean, the country does need to change, and change quite considerably to compete on a different playing field, which is what Brexit is all about. So Hunt to business, I think, will be the big star move of the day, with Brandon Lewis going to CCHQ to revitalise what is at the moment, or has been certainly, a pretty woeful Tory party election machine. Right,
well, Lucy, taking on Tom's point that battle plans don't always quite go to plan, and you may have a lovely grid worked out with how you are going to reshuffle the pack of cards. Is that why there was a tweet from the Conservative Party, who seemed to accidentally publish that Chris Grayling, the Transport Secretary, was going to become the new chairman? In fact, there it is. Congratulations to Chris Grayling following his appointment as Conservative Party chairman. We've just shown that on the screen, Lucy, and then it was quickly deleted. Does that show an element of confusion and chaos in terms of this reshuffle if, as Tom says, it's actually going to be Brandon Lewis?
Well, yes, that's what it certainly points to, at least confusion and chaos in CCHQ from where the tweet came. I think that if it turns out to be wrong, and that message obviously coming from the official Conservative Party account, really it's just the perfect example of why CCHQ needs a major shake-up. I think with Labour being very proficient in terms of its social media campaigning, a lot of fresh imagery, good use of video, and the Conservatives are really lagging in that aspect of their campaigning, and it's just yet another priority that the new party chairman is going to have to take on.
Now, the new party chairman role will have an impact, of course, as far as the government and the Conservative Party is concerned. But what about the wider impact, Tom? If there is no movement of the Chancellor or the Foreign Secretary or the Home Secretary, how significant is this reshuffle?
Well, I think you can do quite a lot with the second order, if I could be a little bit rude like that. I mean, a new business secretary with a new brief to completely reshape the country or bring the country up to speed for a post-Brexit future is quite a big thing to do, and you can capture quite a few headlines of that. And you know, perhaps a new education secretary. I would be surprised if we didn't have a new education secretary by the end of the day. That again is all about a new mission for Department of Education to take on some of the reforming zeal, perhaps that we saw with Michael Gove in the coalition government. That's been perhaps lacking a little bit. You know, take on the Prime Minister's more free schools, more academies, maybe we even return to the grammar schools agenda, who knows. So you can do quite a bit. Perhaps a new health secretary as well, which you could build some fresh bridges with the health unions, which are pretty dilapidated after 6 years of battles with Jeremy Hunt. So there is stuff, workmanlike stuff you can do with this, and you can, certainly recast agendas on stuff that really matters to the Prime Minister, like education, skills and industrial strategy. What you can't do is completely change the direction of your government, which are occupied by those big beasts. You know, Philip Hammond in the Treasury, Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, Amber Rudd, Home Secretary, the three titans of the cabinet at the moment. And you know, Lucy's absolutely right. The reason why the PM, I agree, I think she would want to move 2 out of those 3, Amber Rudd being the only one who's probably impressed universally over the last sort of year or so in that job. She can't do that simply because she, absolutely right, Lucy says, she's not strong enough.
Right.
She will become under serious threat from a faction behind Boris Johnson, the hard Brexit faction, the harder Brexit faction, a faction behind Philip Hammond, you know, the Remainy soft Brexit faction, if she removes the 2 people who seem to be absolutely pivotal to that sort of wing of the party, those wings of the party.
Listen, thank you very much for your insights. I will let you go. No doubt there'll be plenty of people to chase after, or on Twitter at least. Anyway, thank you very much. Kwasi Kwarteng, I mean, that is the bottom line, isn't it? If Theresa May was really in a position of power and strength and could shape her top team the way she wanted to, then she would move Boris Johnson and Philip Hammond. She would look at the big cabinet posts.
I think what Tom said is completely wrong. Not all cabinet reshuffles move the big beasts. I was an MP during the coalition government. For 4 years, we had the same Chancellor. William Hague was Foreign Secretary. George Osborne
But it was a
was
coalition.
Chancellor.
You had to negotiate much more with your coalition partner.
David Cameron was very strong. This idea that you change big beasts, big jobs every year is completely ridiculous. The budget last autumn was very successful. There wasn't a hair on it. It was widely well received. It would be crazy for her. It would be crazy for the Prime Minister to move the Chancellor at this point. So I think what Tom said is completely wrong. I think if you look at governments in the past, you've had a lot of stability at the top, with chancellors and foreign secretaries often staying in the same position. And also what Tom said, where I did agree with him, was this point about the business secretary. I mean, that's hugely significant.
And would you be pleased if it were Jeremy Hunt?
I think Jeremy Hunt would do a fantastic job, but I think he could do lots of jobs. He's a very talented politician.
Right, because you think he hasn't perhaps done a good enough job as the health secretary, bearing in mind there is a crisis going on.
He is the longest-serving health secretary that I think we've ever had in this country.
Doesn't mean he's been good.
He's been there for 6 years. He knows the job inside out. And if he stays, I think that would be good. But if he moves, I would completely understand that. And I think that would be something that wouldn't be surprising.
Nigra, do you welcome this reshuffle and this change at the top?
Well, I think really it's about just moving chairs around on the Titanic. I mean, what people in this country
it always is
really,
a reshuffle, isn't it?
Well, what people really want to know is what are they going to do about the stagnating economy, the crisis in the health service, the shortage of housing, young people facing escalating housing costs and student debt. I mean, these are the real issues that are everyday issues, and people want answers. I mean, this is a deeply unpopular Conservative government. And I'm not convinced at all that any amount of reshuffling is going to make any difference unless they radically change their policies.
Right.
I think Nia's right, actually. I think it's the media who obsess about positions and people. I mean, rightly, it's entertaining. But
so you agree the government has failed on those key issues of the health service and the economy?
No, I don't agree with that. I agree that the main battle, the main debate should be about these core issues in terms of housing, in terms of how the NHS is funded, in terms of the economy, where I think the government does have a story to tell. And I think Labour, Nia's option, would be completely disastrous.
Right. Do you think there should be a cabinet minister for housing, for example?
I think that housing is obviously very significant. It sits within DCLG, and I think that Sajid Javid, as Secretary of State for DCLG, has been pushing lots of ideas.
Should there be a cabinet position? I mean, would that be a radical move to address one of the key issues for people?
Again, I think we're fixating with people and institutions. We're not actually looking at policy. I think the main thing that will help people is the right policies.
All right, let's take a break for a moment and go over to Norman Smith, who is in Downing Street. Norman, can you tell us any more about this reshuffle?
Well, I can tell you some of the movements we've had in the past 5 or 10 minutes or so. So first off, Brandon Lewis, the immigration minister, he is the first person into number 10. Speculation, that will be to take up the party chairman's post. Because shortly after then, Patrick McLaughlin came out of number 10. He, of course, is the existing party chairman, and he toddled off down Downing Street, didn't say anything, but he looked to me like a man who was walking out of government after a very, very long tenure on the front bench, going all the way back to Mrs. T's days. And then James Cleverly, the parliamentary aide, I think, to Brandon Lewis, arrived at number 10. Now, this is guesswork, but I think all these changes are centred around central office. So you could have Brandon Lewis as the party chairman, and maybe James Cleverly would be acting as his number 2 in an attempt to kind of reinvigorate, put a bit of oomph into the Conservative election machine, which of course failed in the last election, and is viewed generally as just being off the pace, certainly compared to Labour when it comes down to recruiting new members, when it comes down to social media, digital campaigning, all that sort of thing. So there is a clear desire to shake up central office, and I think that's what the arrival of Brandon Lewis and James Cleverly is about this morning. Unconfirmed, though, just my best effort at a guess.
Right. Oh, well, thank you for that anyway. We were just hearing from Tom Newton-Dunn about possible moves in business. He was speculating about Jeremy Hunt moving there, and that actually there wouldn't be a like-for-like replacement of Damien Green as First Secretary of State, which is the de facto deputy, to Theresa May. I presume there is no further confirmation of any of that.
No, I mean, all of that is possible. Jeremy Hunt, of course, has a business background. He's a very successful businessman. Would you want to move him in the current sort of pressure on the NHS at this precise moment? Maybe not. In terms of the Damien Green post, I think it's probably correct that there's not going to be a formal deputy prime minister with all the sort of bangs and baubles that Damien Green had, but I think Mrs May will want someone who can act as her eyes and ears in government, sitting on the innumerable cabinet subcommittees that Damien Green sat on, her sort of fixer within government. So I think there will be someone who takes up that post, even if they may not be formally Deputy Prime Minister, a sort of number 2 in government.
I mean, we are talking and have been talking over the last few months about Brexit and how much it has dominated the agenda. But do you think today's reshuffle is going to answer, or Theresa May is going to try and answer, the criticism about government policy regarding key public services like the NHS, like the railways and the economy?
To be honest, I think it's beyond any reshuffle to address those sort of issues. Most people, frankly, couldn't care who's appointed to whatever post. They probably don't even know who they are, and why should they? So a reshuffle is not going to suddenly provide some sort of solution to the difficulties the government may face on the railways or on health or whatever. I think the aim of the reshuffle is perhaps more constrained. It's designed partly in terms of party management to give younger, newer MPs their chance to shine. There's been a bit of pressure building up there, and also to present a more diverse image of the Conservative Party with more women, more new MPs, more MPs from ethnic minorities. So I would suggest Mrs May's ambitions are probably more limited in terms of what she hopes to achieve from this reshuffle.
Norman Smith in Downing Street, thank you very much.